a petition for many years.
We do have to leave this hearing now. You can continue following it online, cspan.org, as the House returns to work on a bill to temporarily fund the Food and Drug Administration.
Resolution H.J. 77, a joint resolution making continuing appropriations for the Food Drug Administration for FY 2014 and for other purposes, and ask for immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 77, joint resolution making continuing appropriations for the Food and Drug Administration for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 371, the joint resolution is considered read. The joint resolution shall be debatable for 40 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr, each will control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.J. Res. 77, and that I may include tabular material on the same.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of House Joint Res. 77, which would continue the funding for the Food and Drug Administration. I think everyone here in the House agrees that funding for the FDA is necessary to this critical operation in order to support our nation's public health and the millions of jobs associated with FDA activities. Most members of this body may not realize it, but the FDA-regulated industries account for just almost 25% of the consumer spending in the United States of America. FY 2013 Ag appropriation included total funding of $4.2 billion. That's $2.5 billion came from discretionary funds and $1.7 billion from user fees. Of greatest importance is the need to ensure that our constituents continue to consume safe foods and use safe and effective drugs and medical devices. Despite reduced funding levels overall for FY 2013, we were able to provide strategic increase of $12.5 million for food safety activities and $10 million for food and drug safety inspections in China. These funding increases will continue under a CR. In addition to the funds appropriated to for the FDA, this resolution that we're debating this afternoon would allow FDA to collect and spend drug and medical product user fees. Of course, the fees are charged to the industry support such life-saving activities for the review and approval of new and generic drugs as well as medical devices. This House has already passed a resolution to fund the public health activities at the NIH, and it awaits the Senate's approval. Also, USDA meat and poultry inspectors were deemed critical to our nation's food supply and have stayed on duty during this temporary delay in funding. It is now time for this body to continue funding one more critical component of our public health infrastructure. The Food and Drug Administration touches every member of this House, either directly or indirectly, and we need the entire agency back at work. We need to also limit any damage to the millions of jobs impacted by FDA's work in the food and bioscience industries. Now is a chance for my colleagues here in the House to join me in keeping this important program fully operational. I would ask that my colleagues support this resolution that we're debating this afternoon and will ensure that all critical elements of our nation's food and drug supply be protected. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized for 20 minutes.
Speaker, I asked to be recognized for as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague and chair, Mr. Adderholt, just said that this bill is necessary because funding for the FDA is necessary. He's absolutely right. But this bill doesn't do all that. You cannot just fund one component of government and not have the rest of government. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. It relies heavily on the Center for Disease Control. You do nothing to fund the Center for Disease Control. So, as just one critical component of the federal government, it isn't the federal government, and that's what's been shut down. So I adamantly oppose this legislation. We've been here a number of days now with the government shut down because people are trying to use the appropriations process, which, is every school child knows, is the process where the President asks and then the Congress disposes. And we use the Appropriations Committee to dispose. That is, we make the decisions on how much is going to be spent by each agency. The President came to Congress asking for $1.2 trillion in expenditures. The Republicans rejected that in their budget and came up with a much less budget at $967 billion. This bill on the floor, the big bill, has the Democrats agreeing to $286 billion. That's a $200 billion reduction. That's just amazing. I don't think this has ever been done before where that big of a cut has been made to the federal government. And yet we can't pass it. The Senate has passed it because everyone knows it's a bicameral process and whatever the President signs has to be passed by both houses. The Senate has passed over a bill here, clean, as we say, means without all kinds of conditionality, and that would go to the President if this House had voted for it. It'd go for it tonight. This whole thing, the charade of shutting down government, could be over tonight. All we have to do is pass what the Senate sent over here. But no, here we go again. Now we're going to take it in piecemeal fashion. Tonight we just bring up the FDA, a wonderful organization. But I want to point out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that since I've been here, in 20 years, we've passed 111 CRs enacted. And in fact, under President Bush, we passed 56. And I'm sure every one of the Republicans passed for those 56 without conditionality. Democrats didn't try to bring down the House. And even under President Obama, so far, we've passed 19 CRs. So why can't we do that now? Why can't we do what we've been doing, this House has been doing for decades, passing a CR to keep government open? It's certainly not the responsible thing for our committee, and we're very proud to be in committee, but CR is giving up because we haven't passed appropriation bills that are really the mechanics of how we ought to be spending money. In fact, my distinguished colleague, Mr. Adderholt, has 94 times voted for a CR. So I cannot support this piecemeal specialty of the day. Let's just vote for one segment of federal government and ignore all the rest. I reserve the balance of my time.
General reserves. Gentleman from Alabama.
At this time, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee, Mr. Rogers of Kentucky.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this bill makes sure that even during this shutdown, the Food and Drug Administration's critical safeguards remain in place to protect our food and drug supply. The health of our people should not be jeopardized. This legislation provides funding for the FDA at the current post-sequestration annual rate of $2.3 billion. This will provide funding to maintain protections for food, drugs, and medical devices and allow the FDA to collect and spend user fees. The length of this authority will last until December 15th or until we enact year-long appropriations that addresses the funding of the federal government in full. As with each of the other individual bills we've considered this week, the language in H.J. Res. 77 is nearly identical to what was included in my clean continuing resolution filed back in September. This bill moves us a step closer to the finish line, but we've got to remember that we can't get there much faster if we find a way to fund the entire federal government. This will require cooperation and conversation from both the Senate and the House. This will be the 9th bill the House has sent to the Senate to reopen the federal government. The 9th bill, Mr. Speaker. The House has voted to provide nearly 1/3 of the funding to reopen the government. But unfortunately, the Senate won't even consider these bills. And so the government is still shut down. Our colleagues in the Senate say they want a clean CR. But when we've sent them these bills, pieces of a clean CR, but clean funding mechanisms nonetheless, they won't even bring them up for a vote. This is not my first choice of how to fund the federal government. My preference would be to have passed full-year appropriations bills of all the government before September 30. The House made great strides toward that goal, with our committee approving nearly all of our annual bills and with the full House passing 4 of them. Yet the Senate would not even pass a single bill off the floor of the Senate. But I still hope and believe that we can find a path forward. It will require both parties, both bodies, to find ways we can work together to end this shutdown. As we work to that end, we can pass this bill to ensure that nearly all of the federal government's food safety activities are funded during the shutdown. I urge support of the bill and yield back.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from California.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking woman who's ranking on the full committee on appropriations, Congressman Nita Lowey from New York.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the reckless Republican shutdown. I wish my colleagues had shown the same level of concern for the Food and Drug Administration over the last 3 years. Since Democrats passed the landmark Food Safety and Modernization Act, Republicans have done nothing but stand in the way of its implementation by underfunding the critical needs in the FDA bill. This bill is nothing more than a Republican ploy, and the claim that Democrats are not negotiating is absolutely false. House Republicans wrote a bill, sent it to the Senate. The Senate adopted the most important part of it, the funding level, and the President agreed to sign it even though the Democrats want greater investment to support economic growth. The only thing Democrats say no to are irresponsible efforts to put health care decisions back in the hands of insurance companies, which has nothing to do with keeping the government open. That is democracy. That is negotiation. We've done more than meet in the middle, but the Republicans now say no to their own bill. We could end the shutdown today if the majority would only support a reasonable solution to allow a vote on the Republican-written Senate-passed bill. Vote no and demand a House vote to immediately end the reckless Republican shutdown. I yield back.
Talent gentlelady is expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, who is chairs the full committee of Energy and Commerce.
For how much time?
I'd like to recognize him for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise tonight in strong support of the Food and Drug Safety Act. You know, as we try to work out our fiscal differences, it is imperative that the Food and Drug Administration does have the resources that it needs to ensure the safety and quality of our nation's food and drug supplies and medical devices. This bill will help ensure that the FDA can focus on that very important mission. You know, over the past week, the House has acted to reopen major parts of our government. The legislation before us is yet another piece of that important effort to continue critical programs for the American people. From food inspections to approvals of breakthrough new drugs and devices, members on both sides of the aisle indeed understand and appreciate the important role of the FDA. This essential work should continue as we wait at the negotiating table for the President to join in a conversation to resolve our differences. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill to ensure that the FDA has the resources to get the job done. Let's stand together in support of food safety and drug approvals. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Gentleman from California.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Levin.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection.
We should not be debating a bill that's going nowhere. We should be debating a bill that will end this shutdown. Yesterday, the Speaker said this: there are not enough votes in the House to pass a clean bill to fund the government and end the shutdown. The truth of the matter is, if the bill will come up, it will pass. On Saturday, 195 Democrats wrote to the Speaker and said, bring up the bill. And informed reports say there are 22 Republicans who will also vote yes. That is a majority of the House. So I say to the Speaker, let the majority, let all of us speak. The President today said this, and I quote, the truth of the matter is there are enough Republican and Democratic votes in the House of Representatives right now to end this shutdown immediately with no partisan strings attached. The House should hold that vote today. If Republicans and Speaker Boehner are saying there are not enough votes, then they should prove it. Let the bill go to the floor and let's see what happens. Just vote. 2 words. And then he continued, and there's no reason that there has to be a shutdown in order for the kind of negotiations Speaker Boehner says he wants to proceed. Hold a vote. Call a vote right now, and let's see what happens. This is what will happen. So we say to the Speaker, let democracy prevail. Bring the Senate bill up for a vote now.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Health Subcommittee on the Commerce and Energy Committee, Mr. Pitts from Pennsylvania, and I'd like to recognize him for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the FDA Safety Act. Since the Senate will not negotiate with us about opening up the entire government, we will continue proposing common sense bills to reopen critical functions as soon as possible. This bill funds the FDA and ensures that it performs important duties, including inspections of food, medical device, and pharmaceutical facilities. It makes sure that reviews of life-saving new devices and drugs continue, that the government doesn't stand in the way of innovation. We have the most dynamic and productive medical research firms in the world. American companies and universities are paving the way to incredible new cures. In fact, 3 American scientists were just honored with this year's Nobel Prize in Medicine for their research into how our cells function. Americans can continue leading the world in this field, but we have to make sure that the FDA conducts reviews promptly. Let's get the FDA back open and performing their important work. Patients, young and old, are counting on it. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Jim yields back. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the former ranking member of the Agriculture Committee and now the ranking chair of Labor, Health and Human Services.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 3 minutes.
We're almost a full week into this self-inflicted government shutdown because the Speaker refuses to stand up to a vocal minority in his own party. There is no end in sight. Instead, we sit here watching the Republican majority talk out of both sides of their mouths and pretend to hold positions they have been voting against from the first day that they took power. This bill is today's daily exercise in cynicism. I served as chairwoman of the Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee, the body that oversees funding for the Food and Drug Administration. We worked hard to increase the resources at FDA so that more food could be inspected, more outbreaks prevented. We also passed the Food Safety Modernization Act in 2010 to improve FDA's ability to respond quickly and efficiently in a proactive science-based fashion to contaminated food outbreaks. But since taking office in 2011, this Republican majority has tried to undercut and hamstring the FDA at every step. In 2011, the first bill this majority passed included a $241 million cut to the FDA. In 2012, they tried to slash salaries by 21%, hampering the agency's ability to implement the Food Safety Modernization Act. In 2013, they tried to cut FDA by another $16 million. They rejected an amendment that I offered to increase funding by $50 million for monitoring foodborne pathogens and implementing the new food safety law. For years, we've been trying to get the Republican majority to be serious about the FDA and food safety funding. Food illnesses account for 48 million illnesses, 128,000 hospitalizations, and 3,000 deaths each year, and particularly affect children, pregnant women, and older adults. Meanwhile, over 80% of the seafood, 30% of the fruit and nuts consumed in the United States are produced elsewhere, yet less than 1% of imported food is inspected by the FDA. The Republican majority has refused to fund these food safety initiatives. Now they are bringing up this disingenuous bill for political show. The health of American families is not a game. These are people's lives. Over 13 federal agencies have important food safety responsibilities. Center for Disease Control identifies food safety pathogens and sources, and they are not funded in this bill. Department of Justice prosecutes food contaminators, but they are not funded in this bill. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration carries out seafood inspections for the FDA, but they are not funded in this bill. USDA is responsible for a whole host of critical food safety measures, but they are not funded in this bill. Now, if you think there should be only one food safety agency, that's something that we can talk about. This bill does not protect our families from contaminated food. It doesn't adequately fund the FDA. It's another in a series of purely political bills put forward by the Republican majority.
Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, who sits on the Homeland Security Committee for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Food and Drug Safety Act. Right now, moms and dads across this country have too many worries. They worry about whether or not they'll have enough money to pay their rent, their mortgage, and even fill up their gas tanks. They worry about whether or not their hours are going to be cut at work next month. Why should we add to their worry the list of the safety of the food that they're feeding their children at dinner tonight? One of my constituents from Fishers, Indiana, Elizabeth Armstrong, has experienced firsthand a child becoming ill due to contaminated food. Several years ago, Elizabeth's young daughter fell very ill after eating spinach contaminated with E. coli. This brave little girl luckily survived, but she now lives with kidney disease. Isn't food safety a core function of our government? Is it responsible to stop routine inspections of food processors and place our constituents at risk of developing foodborne illness? Mr. Speaker, our parents are worried, but this is one worry they should not have. FDA needs to keep food inspectors on the job. I urge passage of this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California.
Speaker, how much time do the sides have?
Gentleman from California has 9 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Alabama has 11 minutes remaining.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Alabama.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Mrs. Miller, who currently chairs the House Administration Committee for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding the time. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in very strong support of the Food and Drug Safety Act. This is a bill that we're debating this afternoon and would provide immediate funding for the Food and Drug Administration, which is, of course, the agency in charge of the safety and stability of our nation's food supply and our medicine supply as well. And the American people, Mr. Speaker, deserve an answer to a couple of simple questions. First of all, will Congress actually take action now to secure and to inspect our nation's food supply? And secondly, will Congress take action now to secure our nation's medicine supply? Now, I know that many on the other side of the aisle will once again oppose this legislation because they say they need to have an entire government funding bill or else nothing will be funded. I would not yield at this time. And yet they call Republicans absolutists. However, many on the other side of the aisle will recognize these legitimate concerns and to help us pass this important funding. And it's time for the Senate to act on this and the other important funding bills that have passed with broad bipartisan majorities. Mr. Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader and the President cannot continue to say that they will not negotiate on ending this government shutdown. They must stop holding so many important issues hostage to their absolutist demands. I say let's go to a conference committee now, let's negotiate in a bipartisan way, and let's stop this government shutdown. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Congresswoman from Texas, Ranking Member on the Board of Security, Sheila Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Excuse me? What did you ask? Excuse me?
I said the gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I'll yield 2 minutes, sir.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from California, and I thank him for his leadership. Mr. Speaker, what baffles me is that our Republican friends are seemingly acting like there's business as usual. We're quietly on the floor of the House just passing a food safety initiative. Our House is on fire, and there's nobody here to put the fire out. We're in the middle of a government shutdown. Of course, I'm committed to the principles of this legislation. As my colleagues, as a ranking member of the full committee, as Mr. Laurel and as Mr. Waxman, we're all committed to this. But may I remind my friends, 45% of the FDA employees, they are on furlough. Just today, 4 people in Texas were arrested because of FDA criminal investigators. They were trying to sell stem cell packages to sick people, devastated people that were fraudulent and diseased and inappropriate to terminally ill people. It was the FDA criminal investigators that were able to make this case, and the U.S. attorney in my district said thank you. But right now, there are U.S. attorneys across the nation getting ready to lay off their attorneys. The House is on fire, and my friends don't seem to understand. Let me just share with you that there are usually 80 inspections on food facilities a day. They're not going on right now. Up to October 17th, there will be some 960 facilities not inspected. And the only reason is because we will not come to the floor, put the clean CR on the floor, and have 195 plus 21 people vote in the majority to open the doors of this government. But more importantly, have you heard the stories of families whose husband or wives are laid off, struggling to make ends meet, calling on relatives to be able to help them? You've heard of the young woman who came to my attention who had to be carried away to a shelter because she was suffering domestic abuse because of the financial crisis. Or maybe you haven't heard the 70% of Americans who say, 51% Republicans who are saying, we don't like what you're doing, Republicans. We want this government to open. Or maybe you haven't heard from Governor Beshear, who said he is overwhelmed in Kentucky by the fact that there are 175,000, can I get 10, 15 seconds?
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
The Democratic governor says right now in the Affordable Care Act, 7,000 are already enrolled. He's saying that he has a report that says that if this Affordable Care Act works, he'll have 17,000 more jobs, $15 billion in the economy. Let's stop this foolishness with the Obamacare. It's working. Let's get back to work and pass a clean CR. Too many people are hurting. This is enough is enough. We need to do what is right for America. I yield back.
Time of delay is expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to recognize one of our physicians here in the House, Mr. Burgess from Texas, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, the Food and Drug Administration historically has been one of the bipartisan efforts that this House has enjoyed. In fact, a little over a year ago, the Food and Drug User Fee Reauthorization Act passed both the House and the Senate, went to a conference committee, signed by the President of the United States on July 9th of 2012, the middle of an election year when partisanship was at its fever pitch, and yet this House came together and passed that reauthorization bill. You heard the chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee say that he hoped this bill would pass today to allow the Food and Drug Administration to utilize those user fees that have been remitted by the companies that are actually looking to have their products approved by the FDA. And I hope that I support him in that, and I hope he's correct. One of the most important missions of the government, one of the premier agencies of the federal government, is the Food and Drug Administration. Its job is to ensure that medical drugs and medical devices are safe and effective. But the FDA is also a gateway for patients who are suffering disease and disability. With the hope of one day getting past that disease and disability, the FDA is the gateway for those patients. We've taken legislative steps to fix some of the issues with the FDA. They aren't always functioning in a perfect manner. But I know one thing for sure, keeping their employees away from their job is not the way to accomplish those goals. This is a good bill today, the Food, Drug, and Safety Act. I hope the Senate will take this up. The House is going to pass it in a bipartisan manner in just a very short period of time. We'll send it over to the Senate as we have many other bills last week, and we'll continue to send bills. This is the way the process should work. Appropriations shouldn't be done in one large lump. They should be done in the individual departments. I support this bill today. I urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.
Those times expired. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman's voted 19 times since President Obama has been in office for CRs, for the whole enchilada, passing them at all without rancor, without asking the President to negotiate. So there's no reason we can't do that tonight. I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Commerce Committee from California, Henry Waxman.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we're on the 7th day of a government shutdown caused by the reckless actions of House Republicans, and we're considering the 6th piecemeal bill that reopens a few government activities. But it still continues the shutdown for everybody else. Now, I support the FDA. Who doesn't support the FDA? It's very important that they do their job. But you know what's also important? What's also important is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which limits the ability, which has to respond to disease outbreaks and prevent the spread of seasonal flu. They're not going to be reopened. There's no funding for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which limits its ability to improve mental health access across the country. There are things this government does, and I'm pleased my Republican colleagues are starting to understand why government is so important. And that's why we shouldn't have this closing down of government and the reopening it piece by piece. This is an effort to hold the government hostage until the unreasonable demands to deny health insurance to American families is met. And that is a demand that we will not give in to. Let the House vote on a clean bill to fund the whole government, not the piecemeal approach we're considering today. It's a gimmick. It's also poor policy. And you should understand something else, Mr. Speaker. They're not giving FDA the full funding. What they're doing is still continuing the draconian sequestration cut, which took over $200 million out of FDA's budget. They love FDA so much, Fund it where it should be funded, not with $200 million less. Mr. Speaker, there's no funding for hundreds of nations' tribes. There's no funding for meals. I'd ask for another minute.
30 seconds.
There's no funding for meals for millions of seniors. There's no assistance to more than 1 million families in need. I think we're all supporters of the FDA, but if the Republicans were truly interested in FDA, they would work with Democrats. We would have a conversation about it to lift the sequester and restore funding for FDA and all other critical programs as well. I thank the gentleman for yielding me this time, and I yield it all back to him.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Gentleman from Alabama?
We reserve.
Gentleman from California?
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to our distinguished leader, Mr. Chris Van Hollen.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from California. I have the privilege of representing the congressional district that is home to the Food and Drug Administration. Those individuals do great work for our country, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, nobody, and I mean nobody, is being fooled by this ridiculous stunt Republicans in this House are pulling in trying to cherry-pick little pieces of government to fund when they know they're not going anywhere. When the American people know that this House is in possession of a piece of legislation that, if we were allowed to vote on it, would go to the President's desk tonight, he would sign it, and we would open up all of government immediately. FDA, NIH, the veterans, everything. Now, the position our Republicans are taking is made even more ridiculous by what we did on Saturday. On Saturday, we said we're going to pay all federal employees, not just employees at FDA, not just at NIH, all federal government employees. That was the right thing to do. Now you're saying you only want to keep some of those agencies open, not all of them open. So what our Republican colleagues are telling the American people is we want to pay all the employees in the federal government, but we don't want to allow them to go to work. We want to pay for everybody in the federal government, but we don't want to allow everybody to go to work. What kind of policy is that? Now, Mr. Speaker, just this weekend, the Speaker of this House admitted on national television that he had reached an agreement with the Democratic leader in the United States Senate, Harry Reid, where Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats said, we will agree on a temporary basis to the lower funding levels in the sequester in exchange for making sure we have a clean continuing resolution, that we keep the government open. That's what the Speaker agreed to. But then he came back to this House, and he couldn't hold his caucus. Why? Because Senator Cruz and a radical, reckless faction said, no, we can't do that. We have to close the government unless we shut down the Affordable Care Act. And that position hasn't changed. That's why today we can't open the government, because our Republican colleagues want to continue to shut down the Affordable Care Act. Let's vote today to open the whole government. Let's have a vote, Mr. Speaker, on the bill that's in our possession.
Time, gentleman's expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
Oh, yes, Mr. Speaker. At this time, we would continue to reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Speaker, I yield for unanimous consent to distinguished Congressman from Arizona, Ron Barber.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask for a unanimous consent decision. While Congress recessed this weekend, I stayed here in Washington to work with my colleagues to end this shutdown. I talked with Southern Arizonans to hear from them about the shutdown and how it's impacting their families. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you this. I talked with families who don't care who's to blame. They want us to reopen their government. And on behalf of my constituents in Southern Arizona, I ask unanimous consent that the House bring up Senate amendment to the continuing appropriations Republican resolution H.J. Res. 59. We must come together, and we must put the American people first. We cannot allow this stalemate to continue for one more day.
It's out of order for the gentleman to make a speech when making a unanimous consent request. Under guidelines consistently issued by successive speakers, as recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the Chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared by the bipartisan floor and committee leaderships. The gentleman from California has 2 1/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Alabama has 7 1/2 minutes remaining. Who yields time? Gentleman from California?
May I inquire, will you close with? All right. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this piecemeal bill to nowhere that continues to delay and shut down government when we could be passing a bill right now that would keep government open and would open it up tomorrow morning. But we refuse to, the Speaker refuses to allow that legislation to come to the floor. He tells the press there aren't the votes. Let's try it. I dare you. I dare you. Bring it to the floor. Let's see if there's enough votes. Because I think there is. Because I think the majority of this body wants to keep government open and not play these games. These are games. Never done before. Never done before. Congress has never shut down the government. Yes, it was shut down under Clinton, but it was by a veto. It wasn't for failure to get him a bill. And they're saying, well, the president has to negotiate. He doesn't have to negotiate. Bush, we passed 56 CRs. No negotiation. Obama, so far, 19. Almost every member here voted for those. So you've been voting for CRs continuously for years and years without rancor. What's the difference now? You don't like a bill that passed 3 years ago? And you have to come and break the rules here by getting a waiver so you can bring up these issues on the appropriations bill because you don't want to do it in regular order? This is just insane. This is insane. We've never done it like this. And the country's wondering what the heck's going on. Well, what's going on is we've just become children at this fight. This is nuts. And it's not the way to run a government. By God, just let's get government open. We could do it tonight. Let's bring the bill to the floor and vote on it. Vote against this bill to nowhere. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Jimmy yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would hope that all of my colleagues would join me tonight in supporting the House Joint Resolution 77 as has been discussed here over the last hour. I understand that many of our friends or my friends across the aisle will disagree with the majority's decision to immediately fund the most critical function of government during the delay that we have in current funding. I recognize your preference is for a vote on all of government at one time. But you must recognize the truth of the matter is we don't have consensus in the House. Until the White House and the Senate are willing to sit down and negotiate a quick solution to this stalemate, I ask that my friends across the aisle to join me in supporting the Food and Drug Administration, an agency that is on the front lines for our public health on a day-to-day basis. There are a number of us who would question why nearly half the FDA is furloughed when nearly all of their work impacts the safety and protection of human life. However, the administration has chosen to cease activities related to the food, to medical devices, and human drug establishment inspections, to infant formula notifications, to laboratory research that are tied to public health decision-making. Most importantly, I would want to think that the administration is not playing politics with the safety of our nation's food supply. But why is it that 87% of the Food Safety Inspection Service is on the job, while only about half of FDA's food safety staff are actually working, especially when FDA is responsible for 80% of the food supply? As I noted in my opening remarks a few minutes ago, I would speculate that many of our colleagues don't realize how the FDA impacts every single one of our constituents in one way or the other, from formula fed to babies, to blood transfusion needed during emergencies and routine surgeries, to drugs that extend the lives of the sick, to the domestic or imported foods we feed to our families. On every occasion, the FDA is there. Just 2 days ago, this body voted 407-0 to approve a measure that will provide back pay to furlough federal workers. This vote did not impact the critical needs of public health, yet an important vote nonetheless. I would ask that each of the 407 members who voted on Saturday for the back pay for federal workers to now vote in favor of a bill that provides for urgent needs for our public safety and our welfare across the United States of America. Again, I urge my colleagues to support this joint resolution, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 371, the previous question is ordered. Questions on engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Being the chair, the ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution making continuing appropriations for the Food and Drug Administration for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the joint resolution?
I am opposed.
Gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Farr of California moves to recommit the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 77, to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions.
Dispense with the reading.
Is there objection to dispensing with the reading?
Mr. Speaker, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's motion.
Without objection, the motion is considered read, and the gentleman from Alabama reserves a point of order on the motion. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the 8th time we've made this motion to bring the clean CR to the floor. And what could be simpler than a clean appropriations bill? No riders, no earmarks, no policy changes. And I know it's something that my friends on the other side of the aisle have done over and over and over again. In this case, it's even with no increase in spending. It's clean, it's simple, it's the right thing to do. So why are we here today, day after day, tinkering at the margins? Today we fund one agency, tomorrow it's something else. Last Friday it was several others. This isn't any way to run a government, and no one who votes for this bill should think that it is. All this bill does is play favorites, pitting one agency against another for meager government funding. So I offer this motion to recommit with the hope that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join me in funding not part of government, not piecemeal government, all of government. All of government. Why? Because all Americans deserve a complete government at their service, a full-time government, not a partial government or sometimes government. This motion will allow us to take the Senate and pass the Senate version, which is a clean, what we call continuing resolution. And it would reopen government within 24 hours. Very simple. Just bring it to the floor. Let the votes be what it is. We've had, as I said earlier, 111 CRs since President Clinton was elected to office. In fact, I have the breakdown right here. We had 36 CRs, continuing resolutions, passed without these kind of conditionality, without the government shutting down. 36. Under President Bush, we had 56. 56 CRs passed without shutting down the government. With President Obama in the years that he's been here, we've already passed 19 CRs without shutting down the government, without rancor, without conditions. So why? Why are we doing it now? It doesn't make any sense. Nobody can explain this. All the Americans want all of their government back. And we can do that. Voting by this motion to recommit, we can get government open. So I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, support this motion to recommit. Support our ability to get government back working for all the people, for all the time, not part-time. Yield back.
Jimmy yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I make a point of order that the instructions that are contained in the motion violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the bill under consideration at the time. As the Chair recently ruled on October the 2nd and October the October the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 2013. The instructions contain a special order of business within the jurisdiction of Committee on Rules, and therefore the amendment is not germane to the underlying bill, and I insist on my point of order.
Does any member wish to be heard on the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I request to be heard on point of order.
From California.
Mr. Speaker, doesn't this bill before us fund a portion of the federal government? My motion to recommit would open the entire federal government so that all the consumer protections that our nation provides are guaranteed. We need to open up not just food safety, but we also need to open up the Center for Disease Control. We need to open up consumer hotlines. Can the chair explain why it is not germane to open up all the nation's consumer protections? Last Saturday,
Gentlemen have further argument confined to the point of order?
Yes, last Saturday we agreed to pay our workers furloughed during a shutdown. I supported that bill. But what sense does it make to have workers paid to sit at home and not be able to do their jobs? What kind of strange house is this that would force the situation on our federal workers? You got to sit at home, but don't worry, you'll get paid. Mr. Speaker, if you rule this motion out of order, does that mean we will not have a chance to keep the entire federal government open today? Can the chair please explain why we can't keep the entire federal government open tonight, now?
The chair is prepared to rule on the point of order raised by the gentleman from Alabama. The gentleman from Alabama makes a point of order that the instructions proposed in the motion to recommit offered by the gentleman from California are not germane. The joint resolution extends funding related to the Food and Drug Administration. The instructions in the motion propose an order of business in the House. On October 2nd, October 3rd, and October 4th, 2013, the chair ruled that a motion to recommit proposing an order of business of the House was not germane to various measures on the basis that the motion failed the committee jurisdiction test of germaneness. Here, the joint resolution falls within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Appropriations. The instructions in the motion fall within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Rules. The instructions, therefore, propose a non-germane amendment. The point of order is sustained.
I oppose, Mr. Speaker. I appeal the ruling of the chair.
The gentleman from California appeals the ruling of the chair. The question is, shall the decision of the chair stand as the judgment of the House? For what purpose, gentleman from Alabama, rise?
I move to lay the appeal on the table.
Questions on the motion to table. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from California.
I ask for yeas and nays, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from California requests the yeas and nays. Those in support of the request will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to table will be followed by a 5-minute vote on passage of the joint resolution if arising without further proceedings in recommittal. This is a 15-minute vote.
And taking a procedural vote on FDA safety programs. This is a 15-minute vote, as we just heard. The first in the series of votes for today, the only vote scheduled for today. And we're going to be taking your calls. Those numbers are at the top of your screen. Take a look and go ahead, let us know what you think about the government shutdown. In the meantime, before we get to the first calls, we're going to take a look at what a Capitol Hill reporter had to say earlier about that shutdown. A look now at the latest on the federal government shutdown. Kathleen Hunter joins us. She's a congressional correspondent for Bloomberg News. Kathleen, what are congressional leaders saying now about the shutdown and the coming deadline on the debt ceiling?
Well, it looks as though, as the days have progressed with no break in the impasse over the shutdown, that the two sort of fiscal deadlines on the spending bill and on the debt ceiling are kind of beginning to converge. We're starting to see leaders of both parties in both chambers talking about some kind of yet-to-be-determined legislative vehicle that could perhaps reopen the government and also raise the debt ceiling.
Now, is there any negotiating going on between the two sides?
There really isn't. I mean, that's really what, to me, differentiates this particular crisis or this particular issue from a lot of these past fiscal showdowns on Capitol Hill is that in the past, we often saw folks from the White House, the Chief of Staff, or in the case of the fiscal cliff at the end of last year, Vice President Biden, coming up to the Hill, doing negotiations with Republicans and with Democrats. Harry Reid and John Boehner were in each other's offices talking all the time, trying to work something out. This is a very different situation in that we're not seeing that happening. Senator Reid told us late last week that he had made a phone call to John Boehner to essentially propose what he's been proposing all along, which was to pass a clean stopgap funding bill without any strings attached, but that was the only phone conversation or the only conversation he'd had with the Speaker since the shutdown.
Now, some reports suggest the White House would be open to a short-term increase in the debt ceiling, which we're looking at around October 17th, reaching that ceiling. What have you been hearing on that side of things?
We've heard those reports obviously as well. It seems as though the White House is trying to not rule that out, but they haven't exactly maybe ruled it in. A group of us actually asked Dick Durbin, the Senate Majority Whip, about that. Probably about an hour ago, and he said that they actually were trying to get some clarification themselves from the White House in terms of what the White House wanted to see or would be open to. But he did specify that as far as Senate Democratic leaders are concerned, they want the longest debt limit increase possible, and traditionally they've been talking more about something in the time frame of a year or so.
Well, until they come to an agreement on the shutdown and funding the government, what's the House working on this week?
Well, this week, it's the House has been, for the last couple of days working on passing piecemeal legislation that, it reopens parts of the government one piece at a time. On Saturday, they passed a bill that would provide retroactive pay for furloughed federal workers. Senator Reid had an interesting point late last week when he talked about this. He actually made the argument that it seems as though from his perspective, every time Democrats get up and talk about a part of the government that it's problematic to have that part of the government be closed, let's say NIH funding, because that, holds off on clinical trials and things like that. His argument was that the next day you see the House go up and have a piecemeal bill, and there certainly is some of that to reopen the NIH, and there certainly is some of that going on where you're seeing, these piecemeal pieces of legislation going through the House, which has the effect of inoculating Republicans somewhat from Democratic attacks that they don't want to reopen these popular programs, and also putting House Democrats on the spot because House Democrats have to decide whether or not to vote for these proposals.
And what's the Senate saying about taking up that bill you mentioned, the retroactive pay for federal workers?
Well, Senator Reid had some words for it on Saturday on the floor. He said that he thought it was kind of silly because he figured that, he argued that House Republicans, if they wanted to make sure federal workers could get paid, the easiest way to do that would be to reopen the government so they could go back to work. However, it's interesting that Senate Democrats haven't really ruled out actually passing that bill, and it sounds like they would be willing to do it. The White House, unlike the other piecemeal pieces of legislation, the White House has not threatened to veto that particular piece of legislation. However, Senator Durbin told us earlier today that there perhaps are some objections, it sounded like on the Republican side, that they were trying to figure out whether or not it would be possible to do that bill without a roll call vote to expedite the process of it in the Senate so that they could do it either on a voice vote or by unanimous consent, but that at this point it doesn't look like there's agreement on the Republican side to do that.
Why would Republicans not want to take that bill up or would vote against it?
I mean, I think there's some concerns generally about paying folks that are, not working. Even Senator Reid questioned, on Saturday questioned the merits of doing something like that. If you're not working, you're basically, he said, sort of getting like a paid vacation. He was making the broader case that those folks should be allowed to go back to work. But, I think there is I imagine that there's some reticence on the part of some Senate Republicans, who in the past have had concerns about government workers getting paid the amount that they're paid on a regular basis, in terms of paying them for work that, arguably they did not do.
Kathleen Hunter is congressional correspondent for Bloomberg News. Thanks for the information.
Thank you.
A little bit more on that issue. CQ roll call reports that Minority Whip John Cornyn in the Senate said it would be premature to move forward on the back pay for federal workers who've been furloughed without addressing other elements of the government shutdown. He says that he thinks that senators should deal with the underlying problem, and you can read that entire article at CQ Roll Call. In the meantime, we are going to go on and get your opinion of what's going on with the shutdown while the House is in this vote. Again, it's a 15-minute vote, the first in the series for tonight, the only vote scheduled for tonight. And our first call is coming from John in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on the Independence line. Go ahead, John.
How you doing? Thank you for taking my call. I'm just watching this over and over, and it's just a shame. These Republicans and Democrats need to come together and to come to some kind of consensus. I'm reading on Twitter, and I see that 25 House GOPers say they're ready to vote for a clean CR to end this shutdown, and we need this shutdown to happen. I'm talking to different federal workers, and they're saying how they're being affected by the shutdown. They don't know whether they're going to get their back pay. They don't know if they can get on unemployment. They're just really distraught at this time, and we need this shutdown to end. Speaker Boehner needs to let his members, let the Republicans vote, and we need to get a clean CR now. The president has came over and over. I'm tired of hearing the same speeches, tired of hearing the same piecemeal bills, and it's time out, and we need to get this government back open. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, John. Again, the number is Republicans 202-585-3885. For Democrats, 202-585-3886. And for independents and others, use the phone line 202-585-3887. Next call is also from John, calling from Georgia on the Republicans line.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, and I'm like the previous gentleman, I was sitting and listening to this back and two for I don't know how long, and the Democrats keep talking about clean CR, clean CR, clean CR, when actually the Republican bill is closer to the original Obamacare bill than what it is now, that the Democrats in the Senate are insisting is a clean CR. In other words, in the original bill, there was no exemption for big businesses, and the best I recall, there wasn't an exemption for Congress. And those are the only two basic things that the Republicans are asking for to pass this bill. And I don't understand why they don't emphasize that more in their debates and what have you.
Thanks for making that point, John. On to Angela in Owenton, Kentucky. She's on the Democrats line.
Yes, thank you. The reason I'm calling is I've been watching this debate back and forth, and it seems like to me it's just a conflict of egos between the House, the Senate, and President Obama. You know, I'm not necessarily an Obama fan, but it seems like to me that if they can't come to some kind of vote on this, that they're affecting a lot of people. You know, I don't think that they should necessarily, the federal people should get back pay, but I do believe that, you know, our government is making a bad influence on other countries because it looks like, you know, we can't get along here. How are we going to get along with anybody else or show that we are the United States of America and a country that, you know, other countries can reckon with? And, you know, I just think it's a shame that, you know, we have to shut down the government and because they can't come to a decision.
All right, and we are, of course, in a vote. Again, one of a number of what are being called piecemeal votes, an attempt by House Republicans to open parts of the government, none of them, of course, making their way over to the Senate and being taken up by the Senate. So, again, this one would attempt to open up the FDA and allow funding to go forward for the FDA's safety programs. Getting your calls on what you think about the government shutdown. Calling from Jensen Beach, Florida is Lawrence on the Independence line. Hi, Lawrence.
Hello. This is utterly ridiculous. I've been a Republican, and there's a lot of things that this president has done that I don't agree with, but it's not for a Republican, because I just distance myself from both parties. because no one knows what they're doing. Right now, if they don't pass the full restoration of the government, you're going to see a civil war, a war break out in this country that makes the Civil War look like tiddlywinks.
All right, Lawrence, thanks. And Kurt is in Hartsville, Tennessee, on the Republicans line. Kurt, what do you think?
How you doing? Up front, I'll tell you, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I hear a lot of people on the C-SPAN talk about following Jesus Christ, help, healing the sick, giving to the poor. Keyword, give. Jesus said, I have not come to destroy the law. The 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, do not covet your neighbor's goods, thou shalt not lie. And that's all these people are doing. I'm out here in the real world watching people lie and steal to get on food stamps so they can sell them for cash, half the value in cash, and get street drugs and get high. I'm out here in the real world. And Jesus said, do not steal. Take from one what is theirs, what they worked hard to earn, and then turn around and pretend that it's generous of you to give it to someone who did not a darn thing to deserve it.
All right, Kurt, thanks. Patty's in Wilmington, Ohio, on the Independence line. Hi, Patty.
Hi. I am not for Obamacare at all, and I think that the Senate or the government should be reopened. I think that it's just a standstill between the two parties, and I think it's a disgrace. And I was Republican, but I'm more of an independent because I see the progressives in the Republican side just as much as I do in the Democratic side. So I'm more of an independent now because I think that this is ridiculous that neither party, that they won't give. They are punishing the people. They are only punishing the people, and the people do not want Obamacare. It is a train wreck, and and even parts of it are not up and running. And Obama knows it himself. It's not ready for the marketplace, and we don't want it. It's already causing jobs. That people were needing jobs, and here this is costing jobs. It's causing our insurances to go up, and even the Medicare is going up. Everything is going up. It's just destroying us, going to destroy us. And so I hope that at least that they keep it shut down. If they do not, I don't want Obamacare funded.
All right. Well, let's hear what some of House Speaker John Boehner had to say earlier today. He spoke briefly on the floor, and he talked about the shutdown, as did President Obama, who made a surprise appearance at FEMA headquarters today. We'll hear first from the Speaker of the House and then from the President.
Colleagues, over the last 10 days, we've been through quite a bit. Sent 4 bills to the United States Senate to keep our government open and to protect the American people from the harmful effects of Obamacare. Each of these requests was denied by the United States Senate. After the 4th effort, we asked to get a conference and sit down and resolve our differences to keep the government open and to provide fairness to the American people under Obamacare. The Senate Democrats once again said no. The President had us all down to the White House last week, only to remind me that he was not going to negotiate over keeping the government open or over the looming need to increase the debt limit. The President's refusal to negotiate is hurting our economy and putting our country at risk. This morning, a senior White House official said that the President would rather default than to sit down and negotiate. Really? The President, I'm going to say this again, a senior White House staffer this morning said that the President would rather default on our debt than to sit down and negotiate. Now, the American people expect when their leaders have differences, and we're in a time of crisis, that we'll sit down and at least have a conversation. Really, Mr. President, it's time to have that conversation before our economy is put further at risk. And I yield back.
Now, the other thing I heard over the weekend was this notion that Congress doesn't have the capacity to end this shutdown. The truth of the matter is there are enough Republican and Democratic votes in the House of Representatives right now to end the shutdown immediately with no partisan strings attached. The House should hold that vote today. If Republicans and Speaker Boehner are saying there are not enough votes, then they should prove it. Let the bill go to the floor and let's see what happens. Just vote. Let every member of Congress vote their conscience, and they can determine whether or not they want to shut the government down. My suspicion is, my very strong suspicion is that there are enough votes there. And the reason that Speaker Boehner hasn't called a vote on it is because he doesn't apparently want to see the government shutdown end at the moment, unless he's able to extract concessions that don't have anything to do with the budget. Well, you know, I think the American people simply want government to work. And there's no reason that there has to be a shutdown in order for the kinds of negotiations Speaker Boehner says he wants to proceed. Hold a vote. Call a vote right now, and let's see what happens.
And the Speaker of the House and the President from earlier today still taking your phone calls while we're in this vote. Again, this is a vote to move forward on funding for the FDA for some of its safety programs. And Paul's been waiting on the line patiently from Steele, North Dakota on the Independence line. Hi, Paul. Paul, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Are you there?
You bet. Go ahead.
Yes, I've been watching this debate for going on a week and a half now, and I'm getting tired of it, ma'am. And what we need to do, everybody who's out of work, and the poor people, and everybody, we need to start impeaching these people for not doing their jobs and don't care about the United States people.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And we're going to move on now. Glenn is in Lakeland, Florida, on the Republicans line. Glenn, what do you think about the shutdown? What's going on Capitol Hill?
I feel that, you know, they need to be working together. I'm a Republican. At this point in time, they're destroying the United States, you know, with their differences and everything. You know, and this is not something that just cropped up, you know, over the last few days. This problem's been ongoing for the last 4 years. And, you know, the bottom line is, you know, instead of working together to resolve the problem, they keep, you know, fighting each other, the Democrats and all that, you know, about not wanting to try to sit down and resolve things. And it's costing us, you know, the people in, you know, the small people of the world more and more money. The Obamacare, to me, is a beginning of socialized medicine. It's not for the United States. I've been in Europe and several different occasions, across and abroad. I know and have seen, you know, and experienced what it's like to be in a socialized medicine type of country. And it's not for the United States. And the bottom line to all of this is they made this mess and they want to strap it on us, make us pay for their mistakes. But at the same time, they don't want to take the same health care that they're wanting us to have to take.
All right, we're going to take a few more minutes of your phone calls, but also let you know that if you want to weigh in on Twitter, you can do that using the hashtag C-SPAN chat. I want to let you know lawmakers have been doing little negotiating at this point. Democratic Representative Lois Frankel of Florida tweeted that, in case you missed it, the National Journal reports 19 times Democrats have tried to negotiate with Republicans to avoid a government shutdown. And the National Journal tweets that nearly 40% of Americans think the U.S. could pass the debt limits deadline without major problems. And that deadline, of course, coming up next week, next Thursday. And on the line now with us, David in Louisville, Mississippi, on the Democrats line. Hi, David.
Hello. Well, yeah, I'm David from Louisville. I talk on Rick and Bubba show out of Birmingham a lot. And all this mess, it all started back when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. Harry Reid, they started this Obamacare bill, and a lot of people don't realize it, but it's thousands and thousands of pages in that bill, and the Republicans are scared of it because nobody's haven't had enough time to read that bill. But still, I'm like everybody else. There's a lot of poor people out here that need help, and they do need to figure out a way to come with a good, clean CR and shake hands and quit having all this madness and bitterness towards each other, because the only way they're going to get to work is they got to get along. And C-SPAN, thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, David. On to Skip. Cortez, Florida, on the Independence line.
Hi, how you doing today?
Good, Skip. Thanks.
Yeah, nobody talks about this, but everybody, it's in the back of everybody's mind. You know, as far as I'm concerned, our Constitution of the United States is under siege, and it threatens our democracy. When money usurps the vote, we're in a lot of trouble.
Okay, and what do you think, too, about the shutdown and what's been happening? Obamacare?
Well, Bernie Sanders was on and talked on the Senate floor, and he talked about this very issue. He was talking about an article in the New York Times yesterday about how the Koch brothers have expended a mass amount of money to block any efforts by Congress to do any work at all that's beneficial for the United States. And I've come to believe that we're no longer a democracy. We're what I term and what I phrase a corporatocracy, and I think our democracy is gone.
On to Houston, Texas. Frank is on the line for Republicans.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just had a comment. The President and Senator Reid have been talking about the Republicans, if they would just put a vote to the floor. Well, you know, I agree with that, but the President and Senator Reid, they need to offer something in return. If the Republicans put that vote to the floor, what is the President going to give in return? Thank you. I'll listen to the rest of the program.
All right. Thanks, Frank. On to Lorna, who's in Newport, North Carolina. Hi, Lorna.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. The Republicans caused this shutdown. There should be no back pay and not piecemeal government. They should take the full brunt of what they did. And I'll be very disappointed in the Democrats if they start piecemealing these programs through.
All right. Gulf Breeze, Florida. On the Independence line, we have Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to say that I voted for President Obama the first time, and it seems like he's more and more, at least on the second term, went to be the president of the Democratic Party, not the president of the United States. It's my understanding, and I'm an independent. I like to look at what's best. I'm not sure about the Obamacare or the health care plan. I'm not sure how that's going to work. But it seems like the Republicans, what I understand is they've offered in the negotiation, they just want to delay the fines that the federal government's going to put out for 1 year, and that would be part of their negotiation if they negotiated. It seemed rather reasonable. I don't, if it's just being stubborn and something, I don't know why they wouldn't want to negotiate that into there to delay the fines for 1 year. It seems kind of strange.
All right. On to Kentucky. Charlie's on the line for Republicans in Wallingford.
Yes, my wife and I are registered Democrats, but after this we're going to be Republicans. We have been watching this with amazement. It seems to me like everybody's been on blaming the Republican Party for the shutdown of the government, when it's actually only Harry Reid and Barack Obama that are doing the thing. You know, they all want, no give.
And what do you want to see happen, Charlie?
Well, I'd like for them to get up there and do what the people sent them to Washington to do, instead of getting up there and just posturing like a bunch of banny roosters and then giving over to the other side. That's ridiculous.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cape Canaveral, Florida. On the Democrats line, we have Lori.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. Listen, I'm a furloughed employee right now. I work at NASA and Kennedy Space Center, and I'm not a NASA employee, but I kind of feel like contractors, which I fall under that category, are being the forgotten people here. We hear this discussion about federal employees are may or may not get back pay. What about contracted employees? I can't go to work either. I have a little bit of a opinion, to say the least, about some comments I've heard earlier. Somebody mentioned that if you allow back pay, it's just like a paid vacation.
Right.
I'm sitting here right now. This is not a paid vacation for me. I'm afraid to go to the grocery. I'm afraid to pay my bills. I'm afraid to pay my rent, my mortgage, whatever, because I don't know when I'm going to have a paycheck again. And this is not something I have any control over. So it's just really frustrating for those of us who are in this position. And in this area in Brevard County, Florida, it's very high impact.
You're on the
because
Democrat.
NASA is a huge employer here.
You're on the Democrats' line. Do you want to see people get paid, back pay the federal government workers if contractors aren't included in that?
I believe everybody should get back pay. I don't think anybody has a choice here. The government is making this decision. The House right now is voting on a piecemeal whether or not the FDA should get to go back to work.
Right.
Why did they have to make those decisions about one segment? Why not everybody? I have been sitting here watching this, and again, I'm very frustrated. I think that they should agree for a clean bill, let the entire government go back to work. That includes contractors as well as federal civil servants.
Well, thanks, Lori, for your call. And if you're trying to get on the line, let you know that you can join the conversation online. If you go to facebook.com/cspan, let us know what you think there, and take the poll that we have there. How much are you affected by the shutdown? About 600 people say they've been affected a lot. And we just heard from Lori, who's one of those. Some people say they've been affected a little, about 270 people, and about 1,000 people say they haven't been affected by the shutdown at all. Let us know what you think. Brenna's on the line. She's calling from Adrian, Michigan, and she's an independent.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I am a current employee with the government. I work for the WIC, which is the Women, Infant, and Children program here in my county. I'm a public health nurse. And I feel like we need to keep in service with servicing our citizens of our country. I know that the vote, as I'm watching it, and the vote come across the screen, that it looks like that this is kind of a split vote down the middle for yeses and nos for the Federal Food Administration. And I'm really hoping that people should keep this in mind, that just in my county alone, we serve 2,400 clients. And I live in a very small rural area in Michigan, and many of my families were affected by the NAFTA back when the September 11th had basically
on this vote, the yeas are 217, the noes are 182. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question is on passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman from